All right, family, this is just Kerry Digsby with Urban Times Magazine, and I have the distinct pleasure and honor to sit and chit-chat with, as was aptly put or told to me, the Wall Street whiz kid, or Wonderkid, Mr. Fredrick D Scott. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing quite well, sir. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So we at Urban Times, we always want to highlight the best of the best, as well as bring to our readers and those that are just learning about Urban Times information that is very important, information that they need in order to become successful. So just knowing what you've accomplished in the past is great, but I want to be able to share this with our readers and such. So let's talk a little bit about your background and how did you get started in, finances. I mean, again, the term used as the Wall Street Wonder Kid, I mean, that says a lot about you at an early age. So let's reflect upon that.
Okay, great. So I was Ebony Magazine's top 30 under 30. I'd been in Black Enterprise. I was the youngest African American hedge fund founder in history. I was actually the youngest African American investment bank founder in history. And I had the largest African American owned bank in the United States. We managed about $3.7 billion in assets under management, and other people's money, basically. I started out as a junior loan officer, and when I started out, I was homeless. I was sleeping in a car, and one of my clients, I had a little computer consulting firm when I first left the military. And one of my clients was a mortgage branch manager and thought that I would be great at selling loans. And I didn't know anything about it, but I needed the money, and there was a guy that was there. His name was Frank. I'll never forget him. He was a Hispanic guy, really nice guy. But, he wasn't the most educated guy, but he was a really nice guy all the same. And he was making $30,000 a month selling subprime loans. And I was like, well, if this guy can make $30,000 a month, how much money can I make? So I got into the industry, and I really fell in love with everything that is finance, from lending to later on IPOs, mergers and acquisitions, balance sheet recapitalizations, fairness opinions, analyst opinions, creating CMOs and CDOs. I mean, I just love everything about finance. And so when I was a junior loan officer, when I first got started, after about 6 months, I had made a little over $300,000 after taxes. And so I decided that I would go off on my own and start my own mortgage brokerage firm. This is 2007 now. So, I went out. I thought I knew a lot more than I actually did. It's one thing to understand the lending process. It's another thing to understand how to successfully run a business. And, I started my business, my lending company, at the worst possible time that you could. Because if you remember early 2007, this is when New Century went out of business. This was when, Aurora Loan Servicing went out of business. A lot of major subprime lending companies went out of business. And so it was absolutely the wrong time to be starting up, especially not having any experience actually running a business with employees. So I made a little bit of money, but I failed logistically. I had no concept of what I was doing. I wanted to be the marketing guy. I want to be the CEO. I want to be the tax guy. I want to wear all the hats. I don't want to delegate any responsibility. And I made a lot of mistakes because of that. And I learned a lot of very, very, very hard lessons. And so I took those lessons into my real estate brokerage firm, which was Acacia Conglomerate, Inc. That ended up turning into 3 offices in California, 1 in Vancouver, British Columbia. I ended up becoming a licensed real estate broker in the state of California. Did very, very well. Very good at training and teaching agents how to sell, list. We did lending. We did listing and selling, real property security dealing. And toward the end of Acacia Conglomerate, Inc., we're actually a servicer for Freddie Mac in the state of California. Mm-hmm. One of the things I learned in that business was about overhead. We were very successful, but I had a lot of overhead and unnecessary expenses. So my profit margins were very small. That business taught me that just because you're making a lot doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a bloated balance sheet with excess expenses. So I learned that in that business, I think one of the key lessons I learned there is not how much money you're making, but how much you're keeping that's most important. So a buddy of mine, he was working at Goldman Sachs, had told me that I should start a hedge fund, a real estate captive hedge fund. And I didn't really know anything about it, but I did the research, I talked to some lawyers and I went ahead and started one. My ex-wife's family, who were diplomats and politicians in Italy, seeded my real estate captive hedge fund with $30 million and opened the world of finance, institutional finance. To me, I traveled around the world interning at Goldman Sachs, not Goldman Sachs, but Societe Generale, Unicredito, BNP Paribas. I mean, I worked at some of the largest institutions in the world, Credit Suisse, UBS, and I learned institutional finance. And because of that, I was able to do my first year, I did 38.5% returns net adjusted audited. And because of that, and I did that in the Greek debt market. At the time, the Greek bond crisis was happening, and they were actually, their federal government was selling their assets and leasing them back for 10 years. I made a killing, but it was because of relationships. Wall Street is truly about relationships. Relationships really do make the world go round and are a true byproduct. Your money is a true byproduct of your quality relationships in business. And so, with that, what ended up happening is I transitioned to an investment bank and grew my investment bank to $3.7 billion in assets under management. And, to be quite frank and to be, quite fair, I was very arrogant. I'm a young guy that comes from nothing. I mean, I come from a single parent home. I'm the oldest of three. My mom was a heroin addict, so, we were broke. We grew up in the hood. I had nothing, and so I worked from that to where I got. And so I was very arrogant, and I, had access to a lot of things that I had never had access to before. And so, I wasn't, the what I would say the nicest of guys. I thought that I could do anything I wanted to do it however I wanted to do it. I said some very curt and very straightforward things that are very true, by the way, such as what certain communities do to the African American community, how they come in, they buy up the land, they push us out, how they get the land at, their borrowing cost is like 2-3% because they're dealing with institutional money, and how we never see those types of things. I said a lot of things in the press that, a lot of people weren't very happy about. And because of that, I ended up with the FBI in my office. They charged me with conspiracy to commit wire fraud with absolutely no evidence to stand on. But, because my ex-wife at the time was in the middle of her green card, the way they came to me, that I sat in prison for 60 days. And they came to me and they were like, you're going to waive your right to an indictment and plead guilty on a prosecutor's information. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm going home. They're like, no, you don't understand. If you don't, we'll just go ahead and charge your wife with the same crime. I was like, we'll charge her. She has nothing to do with anything. She's a stay-at-home mom. They were like, well, we don't have to convict her. We just have to charge her. And then we'll notify the Department of Homeland Security that she's been charged with a federal crime. They'll void her green card application and we'll deport her. Well, me and my wife, she's my ex-wife now, but we were legally married at the time. I mean, we have 3 kids together. What am I supposed to do? So I laid down, waived my right to indictment, pled guilty on a prosecutor's information. What prosecutor's information is basically the prosecutor can write whatever they want. As long as you sign it, that becomes the facts of the case. And so when the prosecutor wrote his prosecutor's information, I looked at it and I was like, 98% of this isn't true. He said, well, it will be when you sign it. And he was right. Wall Street is trust and relationships, so I refused to cooperate. I didn't turn snitch. I didn't do anything like that. And because of that, instead of getting a year and a day or probation as a nonviolent first-time offender, someone who had never crossed the street the wrong way before, I ended up getting 63 months. I did almost 5 years in federal prison for something that they had no evidence to stand on to prove that I had actually done. The worst part of the situation, and I think the most ironic part of the situation, is I'm not saying that, I was some angel. I'm not saying that I was some white hat. I wasn't by any stretch of the imagination. What I am saying is that I didn't do anything different in my investment bank than's done every day on Wall Street. The only difference was the color of my skin. Now, does that mean that all those things are right? No, absolutely not. I crossed the line a lot. Let's be clear about that. What I am saying is that I didn't do this one. And so I found it very ironic that they knew nothing of anything else that we were doing on the institutional side. And of course, I wouldn't talk to them. But, they found me guilty of something that I had no evidence to support. And, it's unfortunate. But, there's a lesson in that. There's a huge lesson in that. And it was, A, be careful who you give access to, and B, be careful what you say and how you say it. And when you say it, timing is everything, and strategy and being strategic with your words and the positioning of your words and the places you speak is very important. So that is, in a nutshell, where I started, how I got where I got, and how I am where I am now.
Wow. Okay. Well, and you know what? It's amazing. And let me first say to you, I appreciate your honesty and your candor in regards to what occurred to you. It's a lesson that many of us and many of our readers upon listening will get a different perception per se. But it's interesting because it seems like even that situation, and I think you even mentioned in that how you came from nothing, and then you had literally access to the world. So now we fast forward to here we are in 2018, and it seems as though you're taking those things that catapulted you to pretty much to stardom. Now you're implementing that and you're teaching others. I definitely want to talk about that because I think that's very important that our readers need to know about how you're giving back.
Exactly. It's interesting. One of my key things now is speaking out, using my platform to educate the community, to teach economic empowerment the right way, to teach what it means to really own a business, not to just have a hustle, but to really own a business, something that's scalable, something that is financeable, something that can be left behind, and something that, lasts for generations to come. Being on the institutional side of Wall Street, I have seen everything. I tell people all the time, listen, I've been everywhere you want to be and literally everywhere you don't. So in that aspect, one of the things I do now, I speak out not just on financial matters, but I speak out on other things, social activism issues like voter suppression, like I speak out on mass incarceration issues. We don't realize that the rules are different for us as African American men and women than it is for most everyone else. It's unfortunate, but in the United States right now, we make up, the United States as a population makes up roughly 5% of the world's population. African Americans make up roughly 14% of the United States population. Yet, as the United States, as a country, we have 25% of the world's population incarcerated, and almost half of that is African American. It's clearly evident that this country targets African Americans and has since we've been brought over here. And a clear example is something that just happened recently. I'm sure you're familiar with the Bill Cosby situation, where Bill Cosby went to prison for something that, we won't get into the semantics of whether he did it or didn't do it or anything of that nature. I'm a proponent of the Me Too movement, and I do believe that if he did those things, that he should be punished for those things. However, there was a Caucasian gentleman that just a few days ago got off for nearly the same thing.
Okay. But hey, open platform, please feel free to speak on it.
So, that right there shows how different the rules are for us than for the traditional, typical Caucasian American in this country. I'll give you a good example of something that's recently happened to me. I've had a nonprofit organization since 2011. We're called the Scott Family Foundation International US Inc. And interestingly enough, we're a civil service organization with the United Nations. I'm on supervised release right now. So the Federal Probation Department decided that I should not be allowed Mind you, I have a financial services restriction. I'm not allowed to work in financial services for the entire time that I'm on supervisor leave, which is for roughly about another 2 years and 3 months. However, me having a nonprofit organization that may accept donations from other people is not financial services, yet they told me that I should not be allowed to handle anyone's capital, that if I persisted to move forward with that they would file in court and weigh in against me with my judge, who doesn't like me anyway, as she's Jewish, and I speak out against, some of the things the Jewish community has done in our community, and, would ensure that I could not do that. So I've had to step down as the chairman and president of my own nonprofit organization. Telling is the fact that I asked my probation officer, I said, hey, listen, how does one demonstrate change if one cannot give back through a nonprofit organization that's large and has been around since 2011? And this is exactly what they told me. They said, find a nonprofit organization that we approve of. I said, oh, so basically I can lend my talents and expertise to a nonprofit organization, a white-owned nonprofit organization, but I can't run my own nonprofit organization. That's very interesting. They were very silent and had nothing to say. It speaks volumes.
Indeed. Wow. So in regards to all the work that you're putting into something that you're creating in order to help others, they are now putting up a wall that will not allow you to fulfill that. Wow. That's okay.
Right, which is interesting, which for me, I when I thought about it and I sat down, I was very hurt. I was frustrated. I was stressed out about the situation, but I thought about it. I said, you know what they can't stop? My First Amendment right to free speech. And what I have is a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of understanding, a wealth of wisdom from not only my successes, but I've learned a lot more from my failures than I have from my successes. So let me lend my voice to my community, lend my knowledge and my education to my community, and better my community through the knowledge that I have. Because there are very few African Americans, unfortunately, that have been where I've been on Wall Street. There are very few of us. We don't get very many opportunities on Wall Street. We don't get those.
So how do we change that dynamic? Because I know you're a big proponent of, definitely educating us, and believe you me, we do need that. But how do we change that dynamic? Because it's interesting we're prevalent in sports. It's interesting that even though we're prevalent in sports, if we try to step outside that little line and either we kneel or we raise a fist or whatever the case may be, we get chastised about it. But how do we break that barrier into those quote unquote institutions such as Wall Street?
Well, let me give you a story. Okay? So if you remember about 10 or 15 years ago, about that, let's say 15 years ago, if you were a member of the LGBTQ community, right, and you were open about that, you had a problem. You were ridiculed. Your family probably turned their back on you. You probably would have issues at your job to the point to where you'd either quit or they'd find some reason to terminate you. Schools were zero tolerant on discussions on LGBTQ issues. I mean, it was a zero tolerant policy in the United States. Let's fast forward 15 years. Now, right, same-sex marriage is legal. Now you can use whatever bathroom you identify yourself with gender-wise. Not only that, the LGBTQ community is protected in a way now that if you say something about the LGBT community publicly, you're probably going to get fired. You can be sued for sexual harassment. You'll lose. I mean, Roland Martin is a good example of someone who posted a sentence on Twitter while he was at CNN that was disparaging to the LGBTQ community and ended up getting terminated from CNN and had to end up going to work for TV One. It's a good example. But why did that happen? And I think that life happens to everyone, but it's not what's happening. It's how you respond to what's happening. And I think the biggest issue in the African American community is that we don't respond properly. If you take a look at the blueprint that the LGBT community used, they pulled their resources together, both their intellectual capital as well as their financial resources, and they used those things to influence public opinion through the media, But more importantly, right, they put dollars behind politicians that they could use to influence legislation that benefited their community. It wasn't easy, but they fought and they let their money talk. It wasn't so much that they were protesting in the street. Yeah, they did that. They protested. They did. But they did more than protest. They used their dollars to command change. In this country, in all countries, we are capitalistic societies. And so therefore we have to understand the power of a dollar, the power of strategically placing our capital in areas that benefit us long term. That's where we have not been effective as a community. That's the problem. We're quick to march and protest and all of those things. That's great. We had a 1 million man march. 1 million men took off work. 1 million men descended on D.C. and marched around and protested, and nothing, literally nothing changed but the time. But 1 million men took off work and lost money. 1 million men spent all this money and enriched D.C. by spending on hotels and food and all of those things, but nothing changed. Wouldn't it have been better and more effective if 1 million men would have just given $1? We'd have had $1 million that we could have directed towards something that would have created a lasting impact for the community. That is where I think that's where we dropped the ball as a community. That's the biggest issue.
Wow. Okay. And that is definitely a great perception in regards to that, and it makes you think. So with that being said, could we effectively do that on Wall Street? Could we gather up individuals such as yourself or educate the next generation in order to move forward, in order to take Wall Street by storm, so to speak, and change our financial futures and how we perceive finances?
Absolutely, 100%. But it takes a collective thought process. See, there are people in our community that are very wealthy, that do very well for themselves, athletes, entertainers, etc., etc. But unfortunately, they have a all for me and whatever's going on with everyone else has nothing to do with me mentality. We should be upset and up in arms at those people. This is why I respect LeBron James so much, because LeBron James gives back to the community as much as he can. But it takes someone to step forward and educate those in our community who have it on how to strategically direct their capital towards things that benefit the community. This is what the Jewish community has done. What the Jewish community has done is they're wealthy, will buy up tracts of land, tracts of real estate, and develop. And then they'll put people in their community who are less fortunate in those properties. They'll educate them properly, help them fix their credit, put them into good lending situations, and they end up becoming homeowners. The wealthy Jewish people who bought up everything and then effectively sold it to their community at a later time still reap profit because they sell it to them at a markup based on where current market value is for the property as opposed to where they bought it. So if they bought something for $25,000 and they turn around, the market value is $150,000, but they put someone in their community in there for $100,000, they still made more than 100% rate of return on their money, but they've also given somebody something with equity. See, this is the thing. We have to think more long-term. We're such short-term thinkers in our community. We have to think long-term. Wealth is built over a lifetime. And so we have to always have our eye toward tomorrow, not just today. And we have to understand that we can accomplish much more collectively than we can individually. No one gets very far by themselves. It's a team effort, and we have to work together. Now, in all fairness, our position against one another isn't just something that we woke up and created on our own. I mean, slavery and slave owners, work diligently to make African Americans distrusting of one another. But we have to overcome that. We are our own worst enemy at this point. We're still expecting a government that is comprised of people who've never cared for us to do something for us when really we are the ones that can protect us better than anyone else can. We have to take care of our own community. We have to speak out. And that's not just, a Caucasian police officer shoots, a black man in the street unarmed. We raise up in arms and we protest. No, how about, that African American boy who just shot that black kid in the street? What about him? We got to raise up our arms and protest about that too. We have to protect our community, and we have to educate our community on how to think better, how to move better, how to be more strategic. And that is what's going to create the lasting impact. We can absolutely make it on Wall Street, but we have to educate our children that instead of being rappers and having this life's goal and aspiration to be a rapper or a basketball player or football player, which are all great professions, by the way, and I don't knock anyone who has a goal or a dream to do that or anyone who's doing it right now. But we need to educate our young men and women on the benefits of being a Wall Street banker, an investment banker, a lawyer, a doctor, things like that make a lot of money. Like, we always look at how much money LeBron James makes as a basketball player, but what we never ask ourselves is, who the heck is the guy that can afford to pay that guy that kind of money, and how much money is he making? I want to be that guy.
That's a good point. I like that. That's a very good point. So it's almost to the point in which we need to, and correct me if I'm wrong, to teach our young people moving forward, empower them with knowledge in regards to economics, but also empower them in regards to what's going on socially and in their communities.
Right. And more importantly, we have to stop getting so distracted by what we see in front of us and start looking for what's behind what they're trying to distract us with. Like, we got so distracted this last week on this whole situation with Kanye West and Donald Trump that we failed to pay attention to the voter suppression issues that are going on all over the country right now that's going to make it very difficult for African Americans to vote, especially in southern states.
Mm-hmm.
That's an issue that we need to be paying attention to. This is the problem. We're so easily distracted. We have to focus and we have to look deeper. We have to ask more compelling questions, and we have to look for the deeper meaning in situations. We have to stop allowing the media and not only allowing the media to create distractions for us, but we as a community have to represent ourselves better in the media as well. I mean, let's just be honest. I'm not knocking anyone for the way they decide to make their money, right? I understand. You got bills to pay. You got to do what you got to do. But let's not degrade ourselves. Let's not degrade our community for the sake of a paycheck. Shows like Love and Hip Hop Atlanta, shows like The Real Housewives of Atlanta, don't get me wrong. There are some nice people there, and I'm pretty sure outside of what they're doing on the camera, they may be nice people. But what they're doing on camera, the images that they're projecting not only into African American youth, boys and girls, and their parents' homes and what they're seeing, but also what they're projecting to other demographics about African Americans as a whole is not a positive image. So if we don't have self-respect for ourselves, if the ratings on these shows are through the roof because African Americans are tuning in to watch this every night, what we're saying is that we don't respect our culture. We don't respect ourselves as human beings. So when another community comes into our community and takes advantage of us, shoots us down in the streets like dogs, defecates on our chest at any time that they see fit, we can't really be mad because we're giving them the indirect permission to do that by the way we behave ourselves in the media. We have to understand where we come from. We come from kings and queens in Africa. We need to act as such. We come from a continent that has more natural resources in it than any other continent in the world. We need to act as such. We're very smart, very capable, very ingenuitive individuals. We need to act as such.
And family, you heard it first right here. So, Fredrick, and I know our time is running short right now, but I know you've said so much that is going to cause our readers and our listeners to really think about the direction that they're going right now. But what would be your closing words? As a matter of fact, what would you impart on, say, a young man, a young African-American man, saying he's early 20s, he's in college right now, yet he doesn't know which direction he needs to go. And we talked briefly about, again, economics, social, and how those two are married together. What wisdom would you give that young man right now?
First of all, I would tell him that there is no substitution for the proper command of subject matter. Knowledge is everything, and applying that knowledge is what is going to make you successful. I would tell that man or that woman, fail big, fail quickly, fail often. Do not be afraid to fail, because with each failure is a lesson, and if you learn and internalize those lessons, you are going to be better set up for success in the future. Failure is not failure if you learn. It is a setback for a setup for success later. The other thing I would tell people is don't chase money. Money is ever elusive. The more you chase money, the faster it runs from you. Chase passion. When you chase passion, you're naturally good at what you do. You naturally reach the highest levels your mental capacity will allow you to reach. And when that happens, you found success. And when you find that level of success, you don't have to worry about chasing the money. The money chases you, and you can never outrun the money. God blesses us to be a blessing. So always remember to not only be a good steward of what God has blessed you with, but to bless others not only with your financial resources, but your intellectual capital. And when you do that, God will continue to bless you exceedingly and abundantly more than anything you could ever ask and hope for. And if you just hold on to those principles, there is nothing you can't accomplish in this life. You are limitless.
Simply amazing. Family, you heard it first right here with the Wonderkid, who has now switched gears and now is gearing up in order to help educate the community on being better than what we are depicting ourselves. Fredrick D Scott. Brother, thank you once again for joining us today and just imparting this wisdom, this knowledge, and fighting the good fight, basically. We want to thank you for that.
Thank you so much. And for all of those who are wondering, you can check me out on my website, www.fredrickdscott.com. That's FREDRICK Scott.com. You can find me on Twitter at fredrickdscott.com. You can find me on Instagram in the same manner at fredrickdscott.com. Feel free to reach out. I blog once a week, and you can find me there. And, I'm always willing to reach out to the community and help anyone that I can.
That's it. You heard it first right here. And also, guys, if you have a group, a large organization, he is available for speaking engagements. He's a motivational speaker, a wealth of knowledge that has been tried and tested over time. You need to check this brother out. You heard it first right here at Urban Times. Brother, thank you once again. Y'all stay tuned. Urban Times.